covering the political landscape along the I-4 corridor. Welcome to Political Connections.
All right, welcome to Political Connections, everybody. I'm Yvette Brusoil. You know, in the past month, we've been talking about a race that usually really wouldn't register on anybody's radar, but with the history behind the office and the twists and turns that have happened in the last month, the race for state attorney in the 9th Circuit, that's Orange and Osceola counties, has become pretty high profile. And when you're talking high profile, nothing could have bigger name recognition than being involved with the Casey Anthony trial last year. Our guest this week, a big name, familiar face from the trial, former Assistant Prosecutor Jeff Ashton. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Beth. I appreciate it.
Listen, we know you're busy, so we really appreciate you making a pit stop on the show, because we could have done it on location, but you said no, you'll come into our studios,
oh, sure.
So we appreciate your time. All right, so you've been with the State Attorney's Office for years, then you retired after the Casey case, then you wrote a book, then you hit the tour, you know, the circuit tour, trying to get everybody to buy your book and you have them signed. And now you're running against your old boss, Lawson Lamar. Tell us how you got from point A, okay, retiring, writing a book and everything else, to point B, saying, you know what, I'm going to run for office.
Well, you know, being state attorney is something I've thought about for many, many years. Back in 2007, when my wife and I adopted our son and daughter from Vietnam, I took 12 weeks off to kind of acclimate them and to become their father. And during that time, I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted my future to be. I mean, I knew I was 3 or 4 years from retirement, you know, that I want to be a lawyer in private practice, that I want to go into business, that I want to teach. But the only thing that really, really excited me was going back to the state attorney's office and fixing things that I thought were wrong with it. As I, you know, approached 2011 and the case was over, I took some time off to think, and I talked to a lot of people in the community, and I found out that there were a lot of people out there that had the same problems with the office that I had, the same things they thought needed fixing. And a lot of people came to me and said, you know, you're in the position now to be able to do that. People will listen to you, and they'll listen to the message that you have about change. And I decided it was time for somebody to step up and say, we can do this better, and that I was the person to do that.
We're going to get more into the meat of what it is that you think needs to be fixed with the office, with Lawson Lamar and the whole race. But let's talk about the Casey Anthony trial for a little bit. You'll forever be associated with that case. Do you see that as an advantage or a hindrance, or both?
Well, I think the value of the case is that, number one, it showed people how the process is supposed to happen. It showed people how good that can be done. And I think that's a quality of representation of victims that our office should strive for. But also, of course, it gave people a reason to listen to me. And that's the biggest thing. It gave people a reason to say, maybe he does have a better way of doing things. So I think that's the main value of the case. I don't think this election should be or will be decided based upon people's opinion of one case. You know, my career is a lot more than one case. I've done almost 300 trials in my career and 85 murder cases. So there's a whole lot that came before Casey Anthony that I hope people also will look at.
Tell me how the process went, very briefly, before we get to the next question, about you getting ready for the case. I mean, people were looking at even the ties that you were wearing, how your hair looked. Did you ever come home and actually watch the news a little bit?
Not that often during the trial.
You probably didn't have time.
There wasn't time, yeah.
How many hours do you think you averaged? I think because the trial would end sometimes late into the night, and then you had to get up at the crack of dawn and get going as we all chased you with the cameras walking into the courthouse.
You know, it varied from day to day. I can say that during the entire 8 weeks that the trial took, 2 weeks for jury selection, 6 weeks for trial, I only had 2 days off. One was Father's Day, which was a year ago yesterday, and the other was one day in Pinellas County when we actually had a day. My wife brought the kids over, went to the beach, but it was pretty grueling, but it was worthwhile. It was a project worth doing.
Well, you've become a pseudo celebrity, because everybody, you can't walk anywhere, I'm sure, without people recognizing you. I want to play a clip for you, Jeff, if you don't mind. A few weeks ago, we actually had Lawson Lamar on the show. We asked about the other candidates in the race and why they were good employees when he hired them, but now that they're running against him, not so much. Let's go ahead and listen and watch. I think some people would say, okay, so while Jeff Ashton worked for you, you thought he was good enough to be part of this team. But now that he's running against you, he doesn't have what it takes to, as he wants to do your job. So what do you say to those critics?
I say to those critics, one, he's never been a leader. He did not lead in our office. I gave him a little bit of mentoring authority over about a dozen people for less than a year. On page 11 of his own book, he says, I hated it. It's a quote, I wanted to go back to trial work. I believe that's a perfect quote too. So we put him back in trial work. He has been a trial lawyer his entire career. Trial lawyer is where you start out in the state attorney's office. The same with Mr. Williams. They have never worked themselves up into positions of responsibility where you have to organize, allocate resources, decide upon cases.
All right, so what's your reaction to that, especially, okay, when the quote from your book about not being interested in a leadership role?
No, that's not what I said. What I said in the book, as Mr. Lamar correctly quoted, is I wasn't interested in a management job that doesn't involve courtroom work. And that's part of my whole position in running, is that there shouldn't be any government positions that don't involve legal work. This office has 13 different supervisors that make, I think, around over $1 million, I think it's $1.4 million annual salary, and none of them practice law as a part of what they're supposed to do. And to me, that is not the way to run a law firm.
Because do you think there should be more involved?
I think you cannot supervise lawyers in practicing law without doing it yourself, or at least visiting the courtroom. I mean, Mr. Lamar has not been in a courtroom except for grand jury, which is a non-adversarial formal proceeding, in 20 years. And to me, you cannot run this office and you cannot lead these lawyers in this particular endeavor if you don't know how to do it yourself and you don't feel it's important. And I think his last quote reflects that he doesn't really think that being a trial lawyer is important. I do. I think it is the most important thing we do, is to groom and mentor and create great trial lawyers to go into court and represent victims in cases. When you don't value that, you end up with a mediocre lawyer and mediocre results, which is what this office now has.
Your passionate style, that's what sets you apart. We're going to stop here for just a moment. There's plenty more to come. More with State Attorney candidate Jeff Ashton when Political Connections continues right after this quick break. Stay with us.